Welcome to Crossroads and Cauldrons. We are two witches with jobs, families, and busy lives just like you. We talk about weaving the web of community, practicing magic, and life in the Deep South. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Selena, and you're listening to Crossroads and Cauldrons podcast. Today we have a special guest that I'm so thrilled about, and we have author Heron Michelle. Hello, Heron. Welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me. I'm just thrilled to death to be here.
Wonderful. I would like to give our listeners a little introduction of who you are. Heron is a witch, priestess, artist, and mom from Greenville, North Carolina. So she's, in the South with us. Bless her. She holds a BS degree from East Carolina University and is the owner of Sojourner Whole Earth Provisions Metaphysical Shop. Okay, that's a mouthful. I did it. Yay. She also has been teaching witchcraft since 2010. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And she's the high priestess of the Sojo Circle Coven. Is my phone seriously ringing right now? No phone. Apologies to everyone. Welcome to the show. Oh, I forgot to mention your blog. This was my first introduction to you, was your blog Witch on Fire from Patheos Pagan. So welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
I recently acquired your book Elemental Witchcraft, and it's fantastic. And we're going to talk about that a little later in the show. But first, I want to know how you first set your foot upon the path of being a witch.
Good question. I think, well, to my mind, witchery being a path, yes, that one pursues, but I also find it to be kind of an orientation. You either, anybody can do witchcraft. It's a praxis, but I think there are people who just are weirdos. And I mean, I spell that with a Y, like the weird kind of folk.
Oh, yeah.
Who just have their own perceptions a little differently than the average bear, that tend to fall into a kind of witchery. And I think I always had that. But I was raised in Taylor, South Carolina, mostly in Taylor's. My mother was a very conservative Southern Baptist Christian that got more and more evangelical as time went on. And so I was raised in all of that. But I just did not believe or accept the stories that were being told to me in church. I was one of those weird kids that paid attention to the hellfire and brimstone and would just go, nah, I just don't think that's it. Plus, the weird thing about me is that I had past life memories from a very young child. My first awareness of that came at when I was 3. And the problem, of course, with that, which makes me pretty strange as a child, is that I was pretty traumatized by my death in my previous life in World War I. And, but at any rate, I always knew that I had been this other person just a minute ago. That was just clear to me. I was a man, and I knew what it was to be a guy, a soldier. And so I never really accepted any of the things like when people say, well, this is what little girls are allowed to do, or this is how little girls are supposed to be. And I'm fine with being a little girl. That wasn't the problem. But I'm like, yeah, whatever. Or any message that we only live once. Nah. Or that God is should be feared. The condemnation thing. Nah. It's like, I remember the divine love. I remember the ecstasy from just a minute ago, when we were all one and and so I had that. And plus, I don't know, there's things that are typical for witches and their abilities. I do have a knack for clairvoyance that was undeveloped, obviously, as a kid. And I didn't know that's what that was. But when you're a little kid, you don't know that other people don't know and see things the way you see it. You just assume everybody does until like later, and you realize, wait a minute, you didn't know that? You didn't see that? So there was that. I had a lot of deja vu. Deja vu. Everybody has deja vu, but it was so constant. I think for me, it's that I dream over and over again, things from the past, things from the future. And it's like one big soup, and I don't know what's what. until it happens. And then I'm like, oh, wait, hold on. That series of events I've already experienced a bunch of times. And then I'd experience a bunch of times again in dreams. So it was always kind of a confusion. Is this the present one? Are we in it now? Or is it going to happen, or did it happen? And I see energy as colors flowing through everything all the time. As an adult person, I have learned to just sort of turn off one way of seeing, and then I can turn it back on when I want to. But things like auric fields, not that I see the whole colorful boundary most of the time, but the little astral template that's right around the body, somebody gets good and riled up, and I see it flashing, and I used to call it a halo, and I could tell what mood somebody was in based on their halo when I was a little kid. So to me, I just had this different way of seeing things that didn't make any sense in my mother's paradigm. The memory of being a man was very confusing to me when it came to gender identity and sexuality and things like that as a young teenager. So I had all the shame and the worry and the fear of condemnation, as a kid, because that's weird. And, they would tell you that you're going to hell for that stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I struggled with depression a lot as a kid because these things conflicted, existential crisis, But I came through that with some pretty amazing, what I call burning bush moments. The burning bush when God spoke to Moses.
Right.
The mythological stories you get fed in Sunday school where they're like, and then God spoke to Moses, and they act like it's a very unusual thing. It only happened once or twice to Moses long, long ago. But it's not an everyday occurrence. But I did have some experiences that are just as plain as day to me in my memory to this day as a 13-year-old later on. And then over the course of my life, many times where spirit just sort of quickens, and
Mm-hmm.
there is a voice and a presence and a message, and sometimes it's in plain English, like a conversation. Other times it's just this like chorus of like a word or a phrase followed by visions that just overtake me. And so my life is just stepping stones of those moments leading me to awareness of witchcraft. So
I think that's a very I too see witchcraft as an orientation, and I think that people have these common threads, and they start out just being what they are, when they're a little
mm-hmm.
kid, and little by little, people sort of shut them down, and they
Mm-hmm.
develop blocks. Which a lot of
Mm-hmm.
my work is helping people kind of unpack the wall that
Mm-hmm.
they've built. And that's why we have such a feeling of coming home when we step
Right.
into this world, which, if you grew up in the South like I did, a lot of this is very hidden. You know,
Mm.
I would say less so now, but, 20, 30 years ago, it was
That was a
definitely
different
harder to
story.
find. You didn't see it out there, but you knew something was different. You were pointed a different direction than everybody else around you. So there's definitely that feeling of coming home when you realize, oh, wait a minute, there is a word for this.
Mm-hmm.
These things I'm experiencing are real, you know.
Absolutely. And
So
that's so
that's
affirming. I think what's important to your work, that's some noble work. I do a similar work. And it's just giving sacred permission for people that this can be a way of being. It can be a normal-ish way of being among your people, you know? It's just the first time I ever heard the word reincarnation was in church. And it was part of a sermon that the preacher was giving comparing other world religions to Christianity and why they were wrong based on the Bible, which is the most horrible fallacies of ridiculous logic ever, but he named it for me.
mm-hmm.
Oh, these wacky Hindus believe in many lives. They call it reincarnation, aren't they silly? But I'm like, oh, that's the word. That's the
That's the word I've
word.
been looking for.
Ah! And there's a whole continent of people who believe that. Yay! It was affirmation that I don't have to be damned for that.
Right.
So that's
Absolutely.
noble. Noble work.
Well, I am your story is similar to my own. I grew up
Mhm.
well,
Mhm.
in the South. Who didn't grow up
Mhm.
Southern
Yeah.
Baptist in some sort of way? Um So I was blessed with a mother who was, she would encourage me to think and encourage me to question, um, in a very subtle way. So I'm very blessed to have had
Mhm.
that. But from every other direction, there was a lot of confusion. But I felt like there was something. I knew there was something there that I was seeking. And you're right. Like you mentioned, you don't necessarily realize that everybody else isn't seeing the same things you're seeing
Right.
until you talk about it and they're like, what? I don't. Okay.
Yeah, what do you mean you don't see the flashing colored light that's flowing in and out of that thing?
Right.
Right?
And being a mother, like you mentioned, having past life memories and talking
Mhm.
about it and that sort of thing, kids do that.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
my
Oh, yeah.
kids did that when they were little
Yep.
bitty. They would tell me about, when I was big, is what they would say. When I was
Yep.
big. Or my son one time said, um, when I was the dad and you were the baby,
Yep.
and it's like, this is it's kind of freaky, even having an understanding of past
Oh,
lives.
yeah. My kids
So
were the same.
I can imagine, people who feel like that's very scary, or the work of the devil,
No.
being very not having any idea what to say in those situations.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, we're definitely have that connection early on. And my son describes that he'll say things like that. He'll come in the room and say, "Do you see the colors?" And my husband's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Shh, no, he sees them. It's fine. They're their colors."
Right.
Oh my goodness. So, oh gosh, so this is a difficult question, and it may be one that we can just throw out.
Mhm.
If you had to describe your path, if you had to put a label on it, what would that label be?
Hermetic witchcraft.
There you go. See, that was easy.
Yeah, I would have had a very difficult time answering that question for you before I wrote the book. But those wacky editors at Llewellyn make sure you are very clear in everything you're saying, and they challenge you in every assumption and ask you to go deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until a book comes out the other side. Very handy process, very handy. But yeah, they kept telling me, by the way, what you're describing as witchcraft, other people don't describe it that way. It might be unique to you, and you're going to need to define that further. And I'm like,
Yeah,
really? Because again, just sort of like abilities, you don't know what other people know. This is such
right.
a it's a path that can be as the paths are as numerous as the people walking it, right?
Mhm.
Everyone can be very unique. And I
Yeah,
didn't come up in a tradition where it was defined for me, not necessarily. I'm
right.
eclectic, book trained. I have had many delightful mentors from a variety of backgrounds and traditions. So it's not like I was all alone in the woods, but for the most part, I was the solitary practitioner, book trained. But yeah, as it comes down to it, the things that drew me along from inspirational things as a kid that you don't, it's like easy to see the breadcrumbs looking back over the trail through the woods. In the time, I wouldn't have known this was a thing, but alchemy, the
Mhm.
four elements, the mysteries that are around that. There's so many little breadcrumbs of neo paganism and magic, even in Disney movies. Like clearly, those
Mhm.
people who were writing and researching those movies, as problematic as some of them are now, back in the 80s and 70s and 90s, they were really pulling from some old folklore, really the stuff that's steeped in all the real magic. It was there, and that was the stuff that would spark me, you know. Um, and I ended up being very inspired to finding my way onto the path. To sort of jump back to your previous question,
Sure.
I got my hands on a book in high school that was about paganism. It was about Wicca.
Mhm.
But because I was being raised under that rock, like I said, it was like being
You
raised
hide it under the mattress.
well, no, I was being raised in like captivity in a dark room,
Oh yeah.
and I've been told that these things don't exist,
Hmm.
right? That's what the church tells you. Those things don't exist. They're not real. It's all fantasy, or it's evil, one way or the
Right.
other. And so I get my hands on this book, and as it happens, it's a modern book
Mhm.
um, on Wicca flavored paganism. But in my bias, I thought I was reading a book about some ancient culture.
Mm.
That was absolutely wrong. But it did introduce some Wiccan concepts that were brought over from alchemy being rooted in Hermetic philosophy about the four elements of earth, air, fire, water, and spirit, how that's related to the pentacle, how those points are also related to magical tools, the blade, the wand, the cup, the paten, the cauldron, the broom, all the fun things. And that imagery inspired me so much that I was just making art and doodling. I'm 18, I'm freshly 18, but I'm not quite out of high school yet. I'm a Pisces. So that whole gap between March and June before I graduated high school, but I'm still living at home. And I was doodling all these imageries and I was just really fascinated by it. I was doing some embroidery one time and sitting at something equivalent to a Renaissance fair, doing a little embroidery of this stuff, this picture. And this fellow, a very nice fellow, walks by and he sees it and he goes, "Oh, that's very nice work you're doing there. So you're a pagan too." And we are in Taylor, South Carolina. And I'm like, "Oh, how dare you accuse me of being a Satanist?" And see, I don't know
Right.
anything. But, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend. As you were. Cheers. See you later." And off he goes. But I just stared at him the whole event. I swear I probably stalked the poor fella. And I realized he was friends with these other guys and was talking to them. And finally, around the fire that night, I asked this guy, a friend of his, and I'm like, "Hey, that guy, your friend, why would he ask me if I was a pagan?" And he goes, I don't know, because he's a pagan. I was like, "But he looks so nice. He doesn't look anything like a Satanist." And he goes, "He's not a Satanist. He's a Wiccan priest." And that's the first time I'd ever heard the word Wicca. I had no idea it existed until then. This was 1992.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I end up speaking to that fellow more, and I'm like, "Okay, now you got to tell me what's up." And he ended up being my first sort of mentor, loaning me books. I ended up being housemates with all those people in my college years. And really, it's not like I was in training or anything. It's not like that. He was just a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But it put me in the right direction. And that's how I found my way to the path. And then, like I said, I went to college for a year in Vermont because I figured there's got to be witches in New England, right?
Sure.
I
They're
found a
all
lot
over the place.
all over the place, but I was sure you could find them in New England. And so I went up there, and lo and behold, there they are with their pinnacles all out. And still friends with these people. So they're all acknowledged in my book, in the acknowledgments part, because they help put my feet to the path. Anyway, I loaned more books, more things. And eventually I just find my way, through about 10 years in the closet, the broom closet of not wanting my mother to find out, and throw me out of the family. Or, well, she wouldn't do that. She was a very loving person.
I
But
mean, it does happen, so.
right. No, I never expected that. It was more like she would start waging her version of, a holy war for my soul.
Right.
It would have been a never ending conversation after that. Anyway, I was able to just do my own thing for about 10 years. I studied a lot of books, but the thing that really brought me to it was my first pregnancy, my first childbirth. Very initiatory experience, childbirth.
It sure
as I'm
is.
sure you know. I was 28, and so it happened at the same time as I was beginning or wrapping up my Saturn return. When you really come into spiritual adulthood and you really figure out what's important to you. And I happened
that's a
to
good
be,
time, that first Saturn return.
Oh. And I happened to let's take your Saturn return and soak it in hormones. That'll be a good idea. And then let's have a near-death experience right in the middle of it. And quit your career, moved back home, suddenly be thrown into motherhood or stay-at-home motherhood from having had a previous profession. It just shook my world. But during that childbirth, this was another one of my burning bush moments. I was had a natural childbirth, but it went on and on and on and on and on and on. And pain is one of Gerald Gardner's paths of power.
Absolutely.
Yep. So you take someone who's got a sort of clairvoyant ability. It's not like it's all the time, but it jumps up and grabs me every now and then. Put me in a very long-term state of sleep deprivation and pain. And then I went to the hospital and they were like, nah, this is false labor. This was after like 18 hours of it. They were like, it's false labor. You're going to just go home. And I'm like, no. And I freaked out. So they gave me a little shot of something that was not supposed to be for pain. It was supposed to just sort of put me in twilight sleep so I'd stop freaking out.
Mm-hmm.
Drugs are another path of power.
Yep.
So a little bit of something to sort of throw me into twilight sleep. And they sent me home. And it was a constant vision. The whole thing was a clairvoyant vision. Now, how much of this was dream and how much of it is real? Who's to really say it's real? Is any vision real? But what a dream
Right.
and a vision, whatever. But at some point, I became conscious. I know I was no longer sleeping because I was pacing the
Mm-hmm.
hallway, but I was still in the vision at the same time and having more of a conversation. And it was funny with each contraction, I felt like I was coming down the long tunnel. And at the end, there was a bright white light, and there was the image of a female, like in silhouette in the light.
Mm-hmm.
And she at first was very crouched down, and it's basically a birthing vision, but she's crouched down and she's pushing the walls. And with each contraction, she would stand more and she would stand more and she would stand more until at last I'm closer and I can see her face very clearly. And she's just this beautiful, loving mother goddess, long flowing, beautiful hair. And I don't know, but in silhouette. And I had this killer of all contractions. And I am fully awake. I think the drugs have all worn off at this point. And I get right up on her and she stands up and she just throws the edges. And instead of being walls, they're now fluttery little veils. And she turns sideways to me. I'm not going to be able to say this without crying.
That's okay.
She turns kind of sideways in the door, and we're like right here, right now. She's really close to me. And she looks me right in the eyes and she said, "You're ready. Come on in."
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I realized that the baby was coming out. I'm still at home in the dark.
Oh my goodness.
Yep. Needless to say, we did a mad scramble to get to the hospital in about 20 minutes. This is in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
We took my ex-husband, father of my children. I swear he took a 30-minute drive and he made it 5 minutes. I'm
5 minutes.
sure we teleported to the hospital at 4 a.m. But we got there, and I'm right back in the same room I had earlier in the evening. And I'm like, y'all, she's coming. Water broke. Now I'm pushing. And in the vision, I'm no longer in the room. I'm by myself on this big plane, like the astral plane, some field. And I look to my left, and the goddess is sort of holding me on one side.
Mm-hmm.
And she shows me all of my ancestors to my left,
Mm-hmm.
long line of women. And I recognize them because, there's my great grandmother Marguerite, and then on back from there. And then she shows me to my right, and she goes, "There's all your progeny." And on my side, the other person holding me was the daughter I was giving birth to.
Wow.
And beyond there, all of her children, and so forth and so on, right? And in my head, I was like, well, if they already exist and they can do it, that must mean I can do it.
Right?
Let's go. And all of a sudden, I felt that same sense of presence. You're in ecstasy. It's ecstasy. Squeezed, like you're suddenly in a tube, but also expansive to the sides of the cosmos. And it's just amazing. And it was just the most powerful thing. It was like a glimpse of the oneness and the unity of the cosmos and creative power flowing absolutely through me like a lightning bolt. And she was born in like 4 pushes. It was the most miraculous thing ever. And I've never been the same.
There are so many layers to that experience, but even just the experience of birth and of being, you're between worlds in that moment. You're literally bringing spirit into flesh, and I think that's one of the gifts of the feminine power, whether you have a uterus or not. That's not what I'm talking about.
Right,
but that is, that I'm not going to be able to make words happen.
Right. That flow of creative power through me, it can't be described, but it was fire to me.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
when so later on, when Jason Mankey asked me to put together a blog for Pathos for him, that's when he was the manager there.
Mhm.
He's like, okay, think about what you want to call it. And I'm like, what do we want to call the blog? What do we want to call the blog? And I do a lot of divination and I throw it out to the cosmos. And I'm here to tell you that I kept hearing spirits scream in my ear, witch on fire, witch on fire, witch on fire, witch on fire. And then every divination I did, anyone, what message should it be? It was always, be to the catalyst or the whatever, whatever. I'm like, well, no, I'm just a witch on fire. And,
Yeah.
the whole irony of that, obviously, I'm sort of working, reclaiming and
Hmm.
being ironic, but I really have been on fire. That set my witch flame alight, as you know, someone might
Yeah.
say. And it's just never dimmed since then.
That's such a, in the I'm temple of witchcraft tradition. So that's part of the work of the priesthood is being a flame with love, having that
Mhm.
fire in the head and igniting that witch fire. So that really resonates with my own practice as well. So thank you for that. So now we know who you are and where you came from. I want to talk about this awesome book that you have just almost
Birth,
put out. It's not out
birth.
yet.
Yeah, it's
Yeah, you just birthed it. So I
I call it my
gotta
fourth child. I
your
have
fourth
two
child,
live children. I have a store, and now I have a book.
and now
Four
you have a
children.
book. So this is incredible. I've got to tell you, when I first got my hands on it, I was like, "What is this gorgeous book
I
about?"
know, isn't it pretty?
It's beautiful. So I'm
I
going to show
know.
the cover. Like mine has like a little note on it. Don't
Yeah,
don't
mine
look at
too.
that, but the cover is still beautiful. Can everybody see this? Maybe.
I'm
It's pretty.
very impressed by the cover artist at Llewellyn who came up with this. They asked me for what I was looking for, and I gave a very meandering description, and lo and behold, they fulfilled it
They
completely. So,
fulfilled it. Well, it's gorgeous. And I opened it up and it's like this thing, I opened it up and the first thing that I did was go through the contents and sort of see, okay, what are we going to do? And every single line I was like, wait a minute. What? Hold up. How the fuck is she going to talk about all of this stuff in one book? Because
right.
this could be an Encyclopedia Britannica set
Well, so
of information.
this little book they sent you and me, this
Yeah.
galley, that's
Yeah.
missing 200 pages.
Okay, that makes sense.
There's 200 more pages. I know it confused me at first when I got it. I'm like, how did they fit it in so skinny a book? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
480 pages, I believe, total.
Okay. Well, that will make more sense. But
Right.
I was still, even though one volume,
Right.
you're covering information that's introductory for
Mhm.
people who are new to discovering this path, and but you're also talking about things that you learn 10, 15, 20 years down the road from working with it, and you've overlaid them so beautifully
Thank
that
you.
that it flows and it makes sense. And I think that's your superpower. If you aren't already aware of your own superpowers, which I'm sure you are,
Thank you.
you take deeply complex topics and you distill them down to something that's digestible and makes sense, yet still holds all that profound wisdom. You've just taken all the bullshit out, and here's the thing. And I love that so much. I've written so many notes, and they're constantly like, oh, she's a badass, look at how this.
Oh, thanks.
That's what I've written on so many of my notes.
Well, you're
I
making
love the
my heart
information.
very happy, because let me tell you what I struggle with, like everybody else, I'm sure, is imposter syndrome,
Oh yeah.
because I learned so much from writing this book. When Llewellyn approached me and asked me to write a book, they actually asked me to write a book on a different subject. And I tried for a whole year to write that book.
Mm-hmm.
But to introduce the subject that they wanted the topic on, which was lunar
Mm-hmm.
witchcraft, that was the first book supposed to be. I kept having to go back and explain something before and before and before and before, because I can't get to this unless we've talked about this and this and this and this and this. And finally, after a year, when the book was like 1 week or 2 weeks away from supposed to be due in first draft, and I basically called my editor about to freak out crying. I'm like, I'm trying so hard and I can't do it, because I kept learning more and more and more about what needed to be said before this, before this, before this, that I had written basically a whole book before the book I needed to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, can I please just write the first book? And I need to call it Elemental Witchcraft, and I need it to be this other thing. And can I write the moon's second? And I'm going to do the sun's third. So it's a 3-volume set. But I just needed to get the foundation stuff and the elemental stuff. It's like, I have to start here on Earth. We can't talk about the moon until we figure out who we are on Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And so, anyway, but the imposter syndrome is because when I started, I thought I knew what I was talking about. I've been teaching this stuff for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've led a coven in the practice of these things. At that point, it had been like 7 or 8 years. And I thought I knew what I was talking about. But then you get into the research, and it, with the beauty of of this book and any book with Llewellyn these days, is that it is going to have so much research put into it, so many footnotes, so many checks and double checks and triple checks, and I kept seeking the path, the rabbit hole, taking the rabbit hole, Alice's rabbit hole, deeper down the hole to find the original sources of things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I learned from the Temple of Witchcraft books also.
Mm-hmm.
I learned from the Wicca Year and a Day by Timothy Roderick. That was another heavy influence on me, and other books of that nature. And so I would go and it's like, okay, well, I learned that from this book, but now where's his footnote?
Then you go to the bibliography
Go
and
to
you
the
get all
bibliography.
those.
And I'm like, now I want to read it from where they read it. So I'd go order all those books, and then I'd look it up in there, and then look it up in there, and back. And so I would end up further and further back until there were times where I'm like, I misunderstood this thing altogether.
Mm-hmm.
I did not understand the fullness of this. Now, maybe it just wasn't time for me to understand it yet, but maybe there were some things I had gotten wrong. And how do you ever know what you don't know?
Right,
So,
of course.
right. So to put it out like, oh, I'm going to write a book, people assume you're an expert
Mm-hmm.
in that field. And I did not feel like an expert. And so I over-researched. I did too much research. So I do try in the book to where if I'm putting forward a notion, an idea, a factoid, or whatever, that I'm going to tell you where I got it from.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I wanted in a book. They say write the book you wish you had.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're end notes at the end of the chapter or end of the book, it's not easy for me. So these are all footnotes on each page. If I put it out there, it's on the bottom of the page. I'll tell you where I got it from. And I can thank the editors at Llewellyn for making sure they kept me really honest about all of that. But I did learn a lot. And I feel like, at least on this little wedge of the subject matter, I do feel pretty confident about it now. But the whole time, the nervousness of, but what do I get? What if I misunderstand something? What if, in my journey to learn more and more, like we're all on this path, right? We're all peeling the onion a little bit every year, or the flower blossoms a little more every year. So yeah, thank you for being so nice about it. Because there for a long time, I was just in weekly therapy going, I don't know what I'm doing. I can't do it. Anyway.
I'm an artist, and I teach, and I have a deep love-hate relationship with imposter syndrome. So I feel you on that. But here's a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
As you were as you were sort of unwinding what you knew and where it came from and things you thought you knew, and going backward to find the sources, do you think that process of watching, starting with more recent authors and then going back to their sources and then going back to their sources, did that help you see the process of each revision, each evolution in these different concepts, and how they've sort of evolved as humanity has evolved as well?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that helped you process your next evolution? Because my
yeah.
next comment is really about, this is a very modern approach.
Yeah.
And I would like to make a brief commentary on modern witchcraft. Witchcraft, neo-paganism, has been unfolding and discovering itself, and in its time is nearly always radical, you know?
Mhm.
But the beginnings of modern witchcraft, what we
Mhm.
considered modern witchcraft coming up, is not, it's very backward in a lot of ways compared to where the way we view it now. But it's still unfolding. Like, we're still shaking off some of the things from the 90s and early 2000s, you know?
And earlier, I mean, the
Yeah.
patriarchy, all the occultists who brought us these things,
Hmm.
um, from, gosh, as far back as you can think. But let's
Hmm.
just go all back to the Renaissance.
Yeah. Okay, let's go.
Agrippa. Let's just
There we
go
go.
all the way back to Agrippa.
Hmm.
So just, or Paracelsus or any of them. So they were dudes in a dude's world.
Hmm.
It can't help that. They don't know
Right.
any better. They're just products of their time. But those biases are going to be in all of that stuff.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so divinity is revealing itself to each of us individually.
Mhm.
And we are interpreting in that best we can through the filters of our expectations, the filters of our previous awareness, filters of our culture, all of our confirmation biases, whatever. And slowly but surely, it ekes its way forward a little bit by little bit by little bit. Now, if I were to, I think one thing that I have been granted through this process, you were talking about a superpower.
Hmm.
If I were to claim a superpower, it is that at some point in I can tell you exactly when it was. In 2014, I dedicated to the great work for myself, that turning of the wheel to asking and answering the question of divinity. Tell me about this unconditional divine love. I need to know more. What do you mean by conditional among humans? Because we know what unconditional from your divine self means, but we're people down here in the illusion of separateness, and there's conditions that must, we need a few conditions. So how do we treat each other lovingly? What is harm? What does harm mean in this context? And I said I wanted to study that question, and I called on the goddesses of love, grace, and beauty to aid me. Any of them would do. Now, I'm a panentheist. I'm not particularly polytheist. I believe that that the gods have agency and they are individual within a larger consciousness. But I had not had a particular relationship. No one had ever tapped me on the shoulder. I hadn't, the goddess images and the voice. It had always been very large. It had
Hmm.
been very general, the chorus of divinity for me
Hmm.
before that. So
Archetypal.
archetypal.
Hmm.
And I mean, about the most specific I got would be great mother, great father, that kind of thing, or horned god, or those sorts of imagery. So anyway, Aphrodite answered, like, whoa, like subtle, like a Lady Gaga concert.
Yep.
Suddenly far more polytheistic than previously indicated. Like, boom. And it was very clear in the messages given through the divine love conditions that are listed in the book on defining what divine love looks like among humans. What does it look like when it's inherent within nature and people? And then how do you behave? That's when I introduced my four rules for sovereignty that are just, my pithy ethics statements that help you to live within that system. But at the end of her giving me all of those lessons, and the way that they were given, the superpower is, I call it Aphrodite's rose colored glasses. And I don't mean it the way other people mean rose colored glasses. There for a while, the filter she put on my clairvoyance, and I was not allowed to take it off for months. It was like I could not stop it. She says, "Oh, you want to know what it's supposed to be? I'm going to show you." And you know how I told you that I could see auras and I would know people's mood
Hmm.
before? And when I was a little kid, it was just natural. And then I got older and I'm like, I don't want to always be seeing that. And I kind of learned to turn it off and turn it on. For about 3-4 months, I could look at a situation or people behaving, and I could see as if it was a billboard on them or like a big thought bubble
Hmm.
above them, the wound, the
That
spiritual wound
caused,
that
yeah.
caused the bad behavior, that
Hmm.
caused the ugliness, that caused the bigotry, the hatefulness, the whatever it was.
The fear.
The fear. It was
Yeah.
like fear would be labeled for me.
Hmm.
And it was a running dialogue with the goddess Aphrodite the entire time. See what I'm saying? This is what I was talking about. See this thing? This was this, this. It was a cause and effect chain. This happened to this happened to this happened to this happened. It's always fear. And the only cure is love. The only cure is love. And now, what kind of love are we talking about? Does this person need the love of resources? Does this need the love of acceptance? This person needs the love of honesty and authenticity. So that all happens all year. And then Hermes comes in. I'm telling you, I had a vision on Mabon Day, on autumn equinox day. I laid down for a little nap and I got woken up by this vision that after I stood up and I'm walking around the room, I still can't shake the vision. And that's when I got the last two rules for personal sovereignty. But it was Hermes coming through and Aphrodite going, okay, now that I've given you what I need to give you, here's my buddy Hermes. Hermes is going to help you write it all down. Hermes is going to help you understand how to communicate this and show you what you need to know for where it came from and how it fits in context with all the other mysteries that we need you to write about. And that's how Aphrodite and Hermes became my patrons. See them on the altar behind me?
Mm-hmm.
So with that, there's a reason why I call it Hermetic witchcraft, and the reason why I believe it was Hermes, because the messages that go back through the Wicca, the parts of Wicca that I like, I do not claim to be Wiccan, the parts of Wicca that inspire me and modern witchcraft follow the trail of Hermetic philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a winding trail that did not always involve the occult. The 7 Hermetic principles that Laurie Cabot taught, that Christopher Pinzak ultimately taught in the Temple series, those were hugely important to me. And they are based in the Hermetic philosophy, but they came out of the New Thought movement, which wasn't even, it was kind of new, the early New Agey stuff, turning the 1900s.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always Hermes, going back into alchemy, all the way back to Egypt, through, and then, via Persia.
Mm-hmm.
It's so eclectic. It was influenced by so many things. But Hermes showed me how these philosophies followed the trail through, and at least what we know. And I feel like that was my guide. And it's funny because, I read a lot of stuff, and there's things that I'm like, okay, I see what you're saying, but I think what you're doing is showing me your patriarchal bias. I don't think you knew any better. But then there'd be this kernel of truth, and it's like it was already highlighted on the page in my vision. Bing, 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 bing. This part. And then there was this little voice. Okay, but here's what I need you to think about. Here's what I need you to look at. Now go look at this thing. And I'm telling you, I go into these, when I'm working, I go into these little trance states that become automatic writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to go back and read what I write a lot, because I'll remember opening the file. I'll remember starting the passage. I'll remember the introductory paragraph. And then 3,000-4,000 words of who wrote that. And I feel like it's sort of this sort of channeled thing that I would then have to go, okay, but research now and figure out what that was. So it's just been a process of revelation and then double checking and researching the wheels off of the thing.
I liked that. I liked that. I mean, every line that, you researched where that was. And I was like, yes, this is great. I work with Hermes as well. I can definitely relate to that feeling of following, that sort of quicksilver energy, following that flow, picking up all those little breadcrumbs. I love where you have taken this. I love one of the favorite lines early in the book. You talked about, we all want to smash the patriarchy, but we can't, unravel and I'm paraphrasing, we can't unravel those toxic patriarchal structures.
You can't take down the patriarchy using patriarchal weapons.
Exactly.
I don't know if you noticed, I put a little footnote on that, or maybe it wasn't in the galley, but it was in the last edition. I can't remember. But on that one sentence, I ultimately went back and added a footnote to say that was first spoken to me in a paraphrase way.
Yeah.
By my life partner, my boyfriend, my sweetheart. His name is Lipbone Redding. He's a musician, philosopher. Mm-hmm. He's a Renaissance man. He's the very first person who ever asked me what do I know about alchemy, and at the time I knew nothing. And he was the person who knew the most about alchemy, and he taught me.
Mhm.
But we were just talking one day here in the house, and I was talking about what I was writing at something. I was probably a blog at the time, and we were talking about smash the patriarchy. And he's a feminist.
Mhm.
He says, "Yo, he says you have a feminist boyfriend." I'm like, "Yes, I do." Anyway, he just stood there and he goes, I keep thinking about this smashing word. I just don't think we'll ever take down the patriarchy if we just keep beating people up with their patriarchal weapons. Don't we
Mhm.
just sort of have a change of bully regime and don't change anything if we keep doing that? We need to do something different. We need to cooperate.
He's a genius. Keep him.
Right. And then he says, "Have you ever read this book by a lady named Riane Eisler? She wrote this book called The Chalice and the Blade. She talks about this. You should read that book." And then he put his copy in my hand. And I mean, if you read the first section of my book, you see I basically just describe what Riane Eisler was trying to say and her cultural transformation theory, and then say, hey, and here's how these tools of witchcraft can help fulfill that dream of bringing a more cooperative culture to the world. And that can be our great work, you know?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that is the great work, at least as it's been, revealed to me. I don't think I've put it in those terms in my mind before because I'm so angry. But if we keep moving forward, if we put forth what we have that's fueled by anger and fueled by even righteous anger and fueled by fear and fueled by destruction, you're exactly right. It's just going to be a regime change. It'll just
Right,
be a different set of dominating forces in charge rather than
right.
really changing how we interact with each other as a culture, as a global culture.
I feel that what has been happening, and it was an imperfect revelation of the excavation of paganism becoming neo-paganism, and the excavation of what became Wicca out of all the threads of other magical folky practices. And it was imperfect because they came from imperfect people like all the rest of us are. But it was, I believe, the surge of um, the god and goddess imbalance trying to 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 bring us to steer the ship more into this new era of cooperation, more goddess based cooperation. And if you just can find the little nuggets of each little chunk along the path that leads us here,
Mhm.
it's still compatible. You just have to remove the patriarchal bias from a lot of that stuff and find the truth, the real truth, the thread of truth that
Right.
flows through
Find the
it.
message
Mhm.
before it went through the filter of whoever delivered the message.
Right. And then I've been able to find myself back to gratitude to those
Mhm.
early pioneers in this for what they
Mhm.
brought forward, and understanding that and then you have to hold it in the truth that whatever I put out, whatever you put out in 50 years, people looking back might go, oh, look, well, there's some problematic things around the edges. We know that's not exactly true anymore, or whatever.
Sure.
Okay. But I think if as long as we try to be authentic, do the best job we can, this is the what I came to, you know, how I had to talk myself into doing this. I do the best I can. I say, here's a thing for consideration. Please debate it. Please
Hmm.
try it. Please throw out the parts that ultimately don't work, but allow it to forward the debate, forward the progress, the evolution of the craft. Take the good parts and run with it,
Yeah.
and hope for the best.
But that's all you can do because everything is going to it's one step forward. That's
Mhm.
all you can do. You're not going to take 100 steps forward in one lifetime.
Right.
It's evolving, and that's part of the work. There are people whose work is in unraveling those things that some want to just hold on to because it's what was given to them, and they want to. Some people's job is to maintain, is to remember, is to preserve, and
Mhm.
other people's jobs is to dismantle and to question and to poke, and then
Right.
other people's jobs is to forge ahead. You have your triplicity just like
Mhm.
every other cycle that we have.
Absolutely.
And so, you have to do the work that is yours, you
Right.
know? That's your work, is taking us one step down the road, and somebody
Right.
else will take that and take it one step further. That's what feels, we're in such an interesting time. I think this happens probably every decade, but, and I'll say this again in another 10 years, the things that I learned early on, which were, I was initially introduced to paganism, witchcraft, all of that, by Scott Cunningham and by the
Mhm.
authors of the
Me
60s and
too.
70s,
Me
and,
too.
of
Yeah,
course. And
absolutely.
then the authors that were writing at the time that I was actually studying those things, which I think in the South, were, at least in Mississippi, we're just a little bit behind everybody else generally as
Mhm.
to when things hit our consciousness. So I was studying those things were brand new to me,
Mhm.
like radical, crazy ideas. Nobody knew what I was talking about in
Mhm.
the late 90s,
Right.
early 2000s.
Mm.
And that and the people that were writing in the late 90s, early 2000s, what they were writing was totally radical. It felt like they were throwing everything out and starting something new, presenting something new. And then, now that stuff seems very problematic. People are having
Mhm.
issues with those authors, on the opposite side of that.
Mhm.
So, yeah, so what you're presenting, I think, is such an excellent fusion. It's such a seamless fusion of
Mhm.
of all of the things that were problematic. They just burned away, and it was so it just flows so smooth. I say it was so easy. I understand, not for you because you
Mhm.
had to write it, but
Not for
for the
me.
reader,
Yeah.
it really, it's like a what am I trying to say? In chemistry, when you have two things that don't go together and you put the third thing in and then it blends,
Catalyst? No,
like
oh,
a
emulsifying?
emulsifier. Yes. So that's, to me, that's what it felt like reading your book. It was like everything that I was like, it should be this. And it was like, but it just kind of,
Mhm.
all right, the people who watch this show understand what I'm doing. I
Well,
hope.
so I being a temple person,
Mhm.
I'm sure you saw all the threads of the temple.
I
How
did.
how many times do I quote directly Christopher
Like
Penczak?
Christopher Missing. Yeah, you said the two
4,000,000
who move is
times.
one. I was like, wait a
Right.
minute.
Absolutely. I am heavily influenced by Christopher. Heavily,
He's a
heavily.
sweetheart.
Absolutely. He's been to teach weekend intensives at the store 3 times over the last 13 years, and I've been up to Temple Fest to study
Oh,
with it y'all twice.
okay.
That
When
was
were you at
great.
Temple Fest? Because I might have seen you there.
Right? Okay. I was there in 2014 and 15.
My first
I
Temple
taught
Fest
in
was
15.
2016. You taught in 15. Okay, come
I
back
taught in
this year.
15. I would love to. As a matter of
Uh,
fact, it's on my list of things I'd like to do to help promote the book, but also just I need to get back, now that I think the COVID fog is lifting, at least for me anyway. I'm ready to get back to it. But also, back in 2013, most transformative experience of my pagan career so far, I went on the Pagan Dream Cruise with Christopher Penczak to Belize,
oh,
Honduras, and
fun.
Mexico. And we
Yes.
took a pilgrimage to sit on top of the ruins of a Mayan ruin called Jin and Tunich. We sat
Mhm.
on the top of the Temple Mound, and he led a ceremony and rocked my world. In broad daylight, I had a extremely transformative, clairvoyant um, experience of, and it went to my ability to do past life retrieval.
Mhm.
One of my, I guess, one of my witching skills, one of my talents that I claim is time. Time is my thing. I can do time.
Oh, yeah.
I can go back through time, no problem. And as we, during that clairvoyant thing, and we were sitting on this temple mound, and he was guiding us in a meditation to and it was kind of a take, go imagine this in the heyday. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, I've been practicing all these skills on past life retrieval. I can do it for people. Why can't I do it for the earth?
Oh, I'm listening. You've got my
Right?
attention.
Okay. It was so powerful.
Mhm.
What happened there was so powerful. But anyway, we happened to be sitting at this moment to meditate briefly, and he was playing the rattle or the drum or something like that, and he was just leading us back. And he didn't do much prompting. And then he was just rattling, and then, here I go. I put my hands on the ground, and I did the same I would do as if I had a client in front of me, following the thread of spirit back to find a previous time for them. And I just went all the way back. And I ended up walking around the city for what felt like much longer than we were actually there. You know how time gets squidgy when you're in spirit anyway.
What is time?
What is time? What is contiguous space? These things are not real. Anyway, so there I am, but I ended up shape-shifting into the three sacred animals of the Mayans.
Oh, wow.
I didn't realize that's what was happening, because when I do past life retrieval, it's like I am there for the ride, like your little
Mm-hmm.
your little sidecar person as myself.
You're the tour guide.
Right. Well, yeah. And then in this case, I'm like, why am I so low to the ground and kind of, and I realized that, I'm the jaguar, I'm the eagle, I'm the serpent. And I kept shifting, and I've never shapeshifted quite like that before. Even when I did the shamanism, the Temple of Shamanic Witchcraft intensives with him, I never quite did that like that. But I learned so much about how this culture and the spirituality of the Mayans in this place, the threads that were so similar to the worldview that is shared by Hermetic people everywhere. The Axis Mundi, the world tree, the three worlds.
The three worlds, yeah.
Oh my gosh, there's so many similarities. The Hieros Gamos of the king and the queen that was revealed in this vision as the merging of goddess and god, for the people in the land, to bless the land. And anyway, it was a very powerful experience. So Christopher is dear to my heart, and his teachings very dear. I teach for the 10 years that I was in the classroom teaching this stuff. Two of the main textbooks was Inner and Outer Temple.
Oh, wow.
Blended with some other things, and not quite a temple approved curriculum, but
right,
because we did our own blending, but nevertheless heavily influenced by it. And his pyramid, the elemental pyramid of power, as you know, I go into detail where I expand that model.
That's one of the things I wanted to talk about.
Well, let's do that.
Okay, let's do that. So, and I was actually just talking to a friend right before we got on the call, and she said she asked me who I was interviewing, and I was like, Heron Michelle. She was like, you won't believe this. I was just talking about her the other day, and I was like, really? Tell me everything. And she was pointing out how in her practice the names of the Sabbats don't resonate with her, so she uses things like high autumn and high winter, and I was like, yeah, sure. And she was like, but I had never heard anybody put that into words before. Like, you were her first introduction to that. So she thought that was interesting that your name had come up. And I said, well, guess what I'm getting you as a Yule gift, midwinter gift. But yeah, so I really enjoyed seeing how you mapped that out and how those two currents sort of create this energetic dynamo. So you talk about it. I'll get off on a tangent.
Woo! Let me tell you what, I could talk about it all day long. So again, this was all happening while I was in the process of writing what was going to be the first book, before it became the actual book that it is, right? So I kept trying to explain things. Anyway, so the witch's pyramid is the second. Well, I don't know. This is probably an incomplete history, but we all know that to know, to will, to dare, to be, and or to keep silent are the four maxims of the magician. And those were presented by Eliphas Levi in Transcendental Magic way back at the, what is it, 1800s?
So, yeah.
Okay. I'm terrible with dates. The minute that I'm done writing the footnote, I'm terrible.
It's going to be like 1790.
Something like that. Anyway. Yeah. Okay. So he called them the powers of the Sphinx. And it was a symbolical system. And the symbol that he would use as the four heads of the Sphinx were the four fixed astrological signs, the fixed sign of each elemental sign. So the Taurus bull, and the man that is the Aquarian water bearer, the eagle of Scorpio or water, and the lion of Leo. And those were the four symbolical heads of the Sphinx. And carved upon them were these four maxims. And that was how one would find their inner temple,
Mm-hmm.
as it happens. Of course, he used the Latin for that, the sanctum regnum or something like that, but their temple. And then later on, it gets into Wicca, and it shifts through various authors and whatnot into more of a pyramid shape. And once it meets Wicca, it's now the four bases of the pyramid, or the four corners, but then there's this top point, and that's spirit, much like the pinnacle. So what is the message of spirit? Well, when it got to Wicca, I mean, author Christopher Penczak, also Timothy Roderick, they all would say the message is the Wiccan Rede.
Mm-hmm.
In your various ways of phrasing it, do as you will, so long as it harms none, however you want to say that.
Will with a capital W.
Will with a capital W. So,
Yeah.
but then I was reading Timothy Roderick's Wicca Year and a Day. Now, he's a psychoanalyst. He's a master's level clinical psychologist. He does psychoanalyst work. He's studied in psychology, Wicca, the occult. And he also talked about the principle of polarity, that Hermetic principle that says everything exists on a spectrum, everything. And that it has to be anchored by both extremes of that spectrum. Everything exists just in a slider bar situation. It's not an either or, but it has to have both anchoring to be real, to be known, to be understood or recognized. Because how do you know if something's soft if you've never experienced hard, for example? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so he's like, all right, well, if everything in the cosmos has this polarity, then these maxims of the dominant or main attribute of the element, sure, we know those. They must also have a flip
Have a
side.
polarity. Yeah.
They have to. And if this is such, what are they? Well, in one of his books from the late 90s called Dark Moon Mysteries, he presents his ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see it in that book. I saw it when it got to Wicca Year and a Day, in the Craft of the Wise, where he presents them. And he doesn't talk about it as a pyramid or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But combining those two writers, I was like, oh, okay, but well, where do those things fit on this symbol?
Mm-hmm.
And I ended up drawing for my own class just sort of a flipped upside down version. And I had, the downward pointing one that was like, this is the goddess. And I would put the receptive mystery. So opposite of to know is to wonder.
Mm-hmm.
Opposite of to will is to surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Opposite of to dare is to accept. And opposite of to be silent or to just hold still and wait is to resonate, or to set your own tone and frequency for what you want to come down the pipe next.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, well, so there's a yin pyramid and a yang pyramid. And I basically had two separate pyramids as if they're coming at each other, like the knife goes in the cup.
Yeah.
like the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon, the triangles intersect.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that hexagram is in all of this occultism. It's in so many of Christopher's books. I was studying along in the Three Rays of Witchcraft, actually.
Mm-hmm.
There's a picture of a hexagram that's got the 7 classical planets and some archetypes and stuff on it. And was studying that. And right after that little bout of study and note taking, I was thinking about the octahedron. And I just happen to have a visual aid. See, I'm ready for this interview. Look at this.
Let's see. Oh, you've got your octahedron. There we go.
Okay, so like a wireframe, an octahedron is the platonic solid for air.
Mm-hmm.
And it's basically a bipyramid. It has, the 2 vertices, top and bottom, and it's got the 4 points. So that is the pyramid in reflection. Mm-hmm. And to me, if you look at the Hermetic cosmology story called the Pymander in the Corpus Hermeticum, which everything is based on that, whether you know it or not in Wicca, whether it's declared or not, it goes back to that. The goddess descends with the watery substance of water and earth. The god ascends with divine light and fire and air. They separate from one, and it says there's an audible cry as if it pains them to be separated. Mm-hmm. And then from this place above, he looks down and he sees the goddess and he falls in love. He sees his own reflection in her waters, and she recognizes him from the shadow he casts upon her earth. And they fall in love, and he descends back through the celestial spheres of destiny,
Mhm.
and she rises to enwrap him in her water and substance. And they become one again. And from that oneness, that all gendered, all element, all possible being, they then become the seven archetypal people who then be, or and gods, and then they become every other thing. The idea being that they are inherent within matter.
Yeah.
They have a spirit and a consciousness. They have divine mind and divine will. They also are embedded within divine love and divine substance. They are the two who move as one, and as are we all. All of us, trees, rocks, water, earth, molecules, elements, we're all both on a spectrum, but we're in reflection. As above, so below, as within, so without.
Mhm.
And so I started working this octahedron thing. If that's true, my great work became of the next year.
What's on the other side?
What's this point?
Mm-hmm.
What's this lesson? And that I started working with the goddess, like, okay, goddess, what's your message? And it became the two keys to the temple: perfect love and perfect trust. That this is, what do you do for your individual will? How do you take care of numero uno? Do what you want, just don't hurt anybody. This is, how do I interact with my community, with my family, with other people? How am I in relationship? How do I interact with nature and the earth and the cosmos? So this is my inward pointing self,
Mm-hmm.
and this is my outward pointing self, how I integrate with others.
Mm-hmm.
Independence, interdependence. It's always been the two keys to the temple: perfect or whole love, and whole trustworthiness, which starts with you. And to me, that was the message, and thus became this book.
Well, look how beautifully you've just tied up everything that we've been talking about. Yes.
So
I
the
Go
receptive
ahead.
side of those elemental mysteries,
Mhm.
those are the cooperative tools.
Yes, and that's what we have been not using to the best of our
Right.
abilities as a species.
So I'm so grateful to Timothy Roderick for presenting that notion that inspired me. And then I kicked it, a little further down the field. And I look forward to seeing what my readers ultimately do with it in 20, 30 years to make it better and more applied. But he wrote that. That's why he's the one
He
I
wrote the book.
approached to write the foreword. And
Well,
it
it
is
was a very excellent forward, by the way.
my head
That's
won't fit in the frame of this thing because of all the nice things he said.
Look, when I read it, I was like, it definitely makes you kind of in a frenzy to get to the meat of the book. And
Oh, that's
you're
good.
not disappointed after that, I will say.
Thank
That
you.
was an adequate forward, I would say.
I like it that he said that I'm basically pulling up in a tricked out limousine asking everybody to go for a ride with me.
I so deeply enjoyed reading your book, and I hope that you've got more projects on the way. You said this is
Right.
part of a series.
Right. So the Pentacle Path series is what I'm calling it. Just to give it a name. It's just because there's so many paths of modern witchcraft. So the system I call the Pentacle Path system, or the Pentacle Path tradition. And it's a 3-part series that has been pitched to Llewellyn as such. So what was going to be that first book is now the second book. I'm due to them by summer solstice next year is lunar witchcraft. So we've established with this book that here we are on Earth, how to live here in our physical bodies and middle world.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're going to take the deep dive down into astral and lunar and the inner consciousness, the inner feminine. That's what we're really going to explore the divine feminine side of the two who move as one through our intuition and our heart space, and working with the moon, the 13
Mm-hmm.
moons that are within the wheel of the year. And then the third book would be solar witchcraft, which turns it back out to the outer world again of how to work with community, to hold the solar sabbats, the turning of the seasons, how to interact with the family and the coven. The lunar witchcraft is going to be very personal
Mm-hmm.
still, but the outer will be very much a community based celebration of the seasons through the 8 sabbats.
Wonderful. Well, I'm very excited. I can't wait to hear that. And I'll ask you the question that I I know we've gone a little over. I only asked for an hour of your time, and
Oh, it's
you've
okay.
been so generous. Um, one of the questions that I really enjoy asking when we have visitors on the show is, what is the project that you are most excited about in the future? And it doesn't have to be anything you've already started on or that's
Mm,
already in the works. It could be just, what is your biggest thing that excites you the most at this moment?
hmm. Wow.
It's a question, right?
Yes, that's a good question. Well, I've been so hyper focused. It's taken me 3 years to write Elemental Witchcraft, mostly, like I said, because of the whole year of a false start on the second book. But I'm so focused on these 3 books. I think what I'm excited about is the conclusion of it. I don't think 3 will actually be the conclusion. To quote my 17-year-old son, who was asking me what it was about, I told him it was called The Pinnacle Path and there was going to be 3 books. And he looked at me like I was crazy and he goes,
There should be five.
Penta, Penta. I
Right?
was like, right. Okay. So I guess what I'm excited about is seeing where beyond the Sabbats, there's a million books on worshiping, at the Sabbats and the Esbats. But I would like to go further out to the 7 celestial spheres
Mm-hmm.
for book 4, which would be the 7 classical planets. So a planetary magic with deeper magic for that. And I think for 5, I think I'd like to take a stab at a very deep advanced theology, the really deep occult theology beyond how these things integrate on earth and applied to a very personal um, when you want to go beyond just witchcraft and into the priest and priestesshood.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's how to really dig to the deep stuff and then apply that in a way that is useful in service to humanity, which has always
Mm-hmm.
been my mandate as a priestess. One of my burning bush moments, I was up at Sirius Rising in New York, a festival up there in 2012, and I was walking the labyrinth and I got a vision for what that should be for me. And to me, it was the hands of divinity, the feet of divinity, the mouth of divinity that serves people, serves the earth. Like you were talking about, we all have a different mission. Some
Mm-hmm.
people, we all have what we're supposed to be looking to do in
Mm-hmm.
our witchcraft. Mine is not a worship of the gods the way other people do. Mine is not a devotional practice. They give me jobs, and I do them to help people and to help the earth. That's my job, and to look into the future rather than the past. Like I'm sadly, woefully ignorant about all the mythologies that even surround my own patrons because they're like, that's not who I am anymore. That's interesting
Right.
and all, but it's like if you were to open up my high school yearbook and try to figure out about me, please don't ever do that. Mm-mm. I'm not the same girl I was in high school. Anyway, it's basically more like let's talk about what we want to be in the future, what we want
Mm-hmm.
to be now, and and how do we carry that into the future for a better future than to worry about the past. So I am not a reconstructionist by any stretch, because that's not the work my patrons ask of me. So that's what I'm
Wonderful.
excited about, is seeing where I can take it for future forward looking application of these ancient ideas into what it means to be a progressive, evolved person.
Well, I think you are adequately equipped for the job, and I cannot
Thanks.
wait to see what you do in the future. Tell our listeners where we can find you. Your book comes out December 8th. Is that correct?
December 8th is supposed to hit the bookstores, including my own bookstore. I do own a bookstore. So we're all geared up to sell signed copies and associated goodies through our website. At this exact moment, our website is down for the big overhauling, retooling to release that when it's ready. And hopefully it'll be ready by the time that the book actually hits. Um, there are snags, but we're getting through it. Anyway, so that is thesojo.com, which is TAGSOJO.com. And of course, we were also going to have related goodies. For example, I did a lot of the images in the book, but there are
Mhm.
some that were cut,
Oh, no.
because of space or
Yeah,
whatever. For example, I did this image. Can I show it? Work out?
sure. Yeah. If it'll show. Oh,
So it's
wow.
just an idea of how the five bodies, the elemental bodies, interact with the chakras to make this open channel of energy from goddess below to god above
Mhm.
and around in the toroid field. How that links to the divine love conditions, how the wounds of fear block that. We've also got the Wheel of the Year system that I put in there. It's figure six.
I love that. It's beautiful.
In
I
my
saw
own
that and I was
hand.
like, yes.
Yes, in my own hand. So this has the moons specific to 2022. And on the back of a poster that we're doing is all the nitty gritty details in a spreadsheet of when it happens in 2022 and the most auspicious times to celebrate. Those will be
Okay,
posters
well.
available. And if you order the book for me, it'll be signed and come with a free poster.
Oh, excellent. Well, that's
Yes.
definitely what I'm going to do then.
And I also can
Um,
be found at heronmichelle.com just for basic author stuff and witchonfire.net for my blog.
Wonderful. And we will put all of those links in the show notes as well.
Thank you.
And I do hope you come back and join us again.
Anytime.
It's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you today. Thank you.
Such a pleasure to speak to a kindred spirit witch. Obviously, we are kindred. So
That's right. Yeah, for sure. I would love to have you back. I won't say you'll be back because that's your choice, but I would love to, you're invited back. Wow.
anytime,
The most
anytime, I'd be
awkward.
happy to show up for you. Thank you.
Thank you. And to everyone listening to the show, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Thank you all so much for listening, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe through your favorite podcast provider. It helps us get our podcast in front of more listeners just like you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can leave us a voicemail by clicking the link in the description of this episode, and you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Crossroads and Cauldrons Podcast.